Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Last week, we gave you tips for starting your pepper plants from seed. Today, we have tips for starting your summertime tomatoes from seed. And now's the time to get those tomatoes started. Again, we get a little help from America's favorite retired college horticulture professor, Debbie Flower. She has ingenious ways of determining if your old tomato seeds are still any good. She has advice on which media is best for starting tomato seeds, and the importance of cleaning your pots thoroughly before planting those seeds. And if that wasn't enough, Debbie talks about the importance of light and wind for your young tomato seedlings. It's all in episode 311 of Garden Basics, Tomato Seed Starting Tips. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Right now, you might be seriously thinking about starting some tomato seeds for your garden. Not a bad idea. You're going to find more tomato varieties on a seed rack or in a catalog than you're ever going to find in plant form at your local nursery. Just tasty varieties, disease-resistant varieties, just an amazing selection of tomatoes. If you've ever looked at a tomato catalog like Totally Tomatoes or the Tomato Grower Supply Company or Tomato Fest, you know you can fill a catalog with nothing but tomato varieties. Wow, that's dangerous for us gardeners when you get something like that. So how do you plant tomato seeds? How do you get them growing so that they'll take off when you put them in the ground? Well, first of all, Debbie Flower. Debbie Flower is here, by the way. Mm-hmm. She grows at least one tomato plant a year.
Yes.
I grow, ask my wife, too many.
Yeah, you grow a lot.
I grow too many. But being in suburban Purgatory, I've really slashed the amount of tomato varieties I try from 40 down to about 10 here. So, but still, I have fun. Starting tomatoes, you get into a rhythm and you just love seeing. To me, spring is when you can rub your finger along a tomato stem of a young tomato plant and then smell your finger.
Get that fragrance.
And get that tomato fragrance. You know that spring is here.
Yep.
Let's do it, yeah.
And there's nothing like the taste of a tomato warm from the garden.
Oh, they try, and they can't duplicate it.
No, they can't.
And even, I must say, though, here we are recording this in late January, early February, and I still had tomatoes from last year's garden in the garage just turning green to red.
Wow.
And it took them a while. That's okay. It's nice having a homegrown tomato in late January.
Yeah.
From the garden. Now, obviously, it has the texture. It's not that juicy. Mm-hmm. And the taste isn't what it is when you pluck it off a vine on a summer evening.
Right.
But still, you grew it.
And was that a keeper variety?
To me, it now is, yes.
Some are advertised as good keepers.
Yeah, there is one even called Long Keeper.
Yes, there is. That. And I've grown that. And
pretty tasteless.
Boy, it was a long, long time ago that I grew it. I was just pleased to have something to eat.
Yeah. It really does, I think, depend on the thickness of the skin of the tomato, whether it can be a keeper like that or not, and actually take the time to turn from green to red. I think the key in picking those late season tomatoes that are green is make sure they've already started turning a little bit of color.
Right.
You see a little bit of color break.
They're not that really pale, almost blue-green. Yeah. They're more on the yellow-green side.
Right. You put them in a single layer in a box or an egg carton, put it in a nice cool place. Maybe
and they're not touching each other.
They're not touching each other.
Because they're still alive. They're still putting off a little bit of liquid. And if they're touching each other, that's where you'll get rot.
Mm-hmm. So you keep them separated. And it might take months, but so what? You've got still got a homegrown tomato, and it's still better than a store-bought tomato.
Yes, it is.
So All right. So that's why you grow tomatoes. But we have to plant them first.
Yes, we do.
All right. So, okay, I picked out my seeds. By the way, we should talk about this. How long can you save tomato seeds, and where do you save them?
The rule of thumb is that the seeds will last 2 years if they're stored properly. And properly means cool and dry. And so I store my seeds in the refrigerator.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
And
it's not dry. The freezer.
No. So it's like 35 degrees.
40, more like 40.
Yeah. So you keep them in the crisper?
No, I just keep them in a Ziploc bag on the shelf.
Okay. And nobody's thought of it as poppy seeds or anything to put on a bread.
No, those are in my freezer.
Okay. All right. You don't have to go that far. You can if you have the room, I guess, in your refrigerator. But just even under your bed isn't a bad place. That's a cool, dry place.
Right. It's controlled temperatures. It's not like your garage, which is going to be extremely cold in winter and extremely hot in summer. That would be brutal for seeds, and they would not last very long there. Seeds are a living organism. There's a fully formed plant inside the seed and a bunch of food for that seed to live on. And so the seed is in a sort of a suspended animation at that point, but it is alive. And in order for it to start to grow, it needs to remain alive. And so it's living off of that little bit of food that's in there.
Do you keep the original packet?
Absolutely.
Okay, but it's not with the seeds. You said you put it in plastic, or do you put the packet in?
The packet is in a Ziploc bag.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
That seed packet helps.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of information, and then there's a picture, and so I usually paper clip it shut. Some of them stick back down, the flap sticks down. If it doesn't, I roll them a couple of times, paper clip it shut. I group them by season, things that I would start in late winter, early spring, things that I would start later in the season, things I would start in late summer for a fall crop, and edibles versus ornamentals. So when I'm ready, when the season comes on, when I'm going to start seeds, I can pull out a bunch that's rubber banded together and look through them and see what I have and what I want to do.
Chances are you probably have tomato packets that are more than 2 or 3 years old, but you can still test them to see if they're any good.
You can. Seed testing is a good thing to do. And it was a lab we always did in plant propagation class. And it's pretty easy. We used 10 seeds because the math is easy if you use 10, and a paper towel, and fold the paper towel down the middle, either direction, whichever, doesn't matter, dimension you want to use it. Put the 10 seeds separated from each other on the fold. Fold the paper towel over them. Well, it helps if the paper towel's a little damp at that point. And then roll it up like a cigar so that the folded side is one end of the cigar. And then the paper towel definitely needs to be wet now. And then stand it up in I think we used a beaker because we were in a lab, but you could use a mug or something, and then put the whole thing in a Ziploc bag and zip it shut in a warm place. And if the seed packet will tell you should germinate in 7 to 10 days. So then we would check it in 7 days and count how many had germinated. The reason for standing the cigar up in the beaker or mug is that the roots will then grow down, and it's easier to see which seed produced those roots. So you can lay it on the counter, but when the roots start to grow, they go all over the place, and it's hard to tell how many seeds actually germinated.
Would the stronger seeds produce longer roots?
I don't know if that's proven or not. Stronger seeds tend to have more food. The bigger seeds tend to have more plant food in them, and they tend to last longer. Sometimes they actually produce bigger plants, but I don't have any data about that.
All right. So, okay, you've done the paper towel test, and let's say you had 10 out of 10. 10
out of 10 means I can take one seed and put it where I want one plant to grow, or I should get 100% germination.
Well, it's a tomato seed, so you're probably going to be putting it in a container indoors.
Right.
All right. In a seed starting mix.
Yes.
More than likely. Probably with a little piece of paper towel attached to it.
Right. So that's what the students always wanted to do was, can I grow this now? And so then we had to cut around. They often stick to paper towel. I know you like to use
coffee filters.
Coffee filters, to which they do not stick as much. The roots are very tender at this point, and if the plant has started to come out of the seed as well, that's very easily snapped in pieces. It's full of water. So we would just cut around the germinated seed, including some of the paper towel, and plant the whole thing into a container.
It can figure its way out of that.
Right.
All right.
Just grow right around it.
And how deep would you plant it?
The depth to seed planting is related to the size of the seed. You want to cover a seed with an amount of soil that equals 2 to 3 times the narrowest part of the seed. Tomato seeds are maybe as thick as a piece of paper, maybe a little thicker than that.
Yeah, they're not very thick.
Maybe, let's say, 1/8 of an inch thick. Yeah. In their narrowest. We're not talking top to bottom on the round side. We're turning it on its side. It's laying flat on the table, and that's from the table up is its narrowest dimension, and that's about 1/8 of an inch. So I would cover them only with a maximum of about 1/4 of an inch of media.
And it would be moist media.
Moist media. I always moisten my media before I put it in the container and before I put it on top of the plant. The reason for that is media can be difficult to wet. Mm-hmm. So if you fill your container first and then water it, it may not get wet all the way down. And if it doesn't, your roots won't grow there.
Well, that's one reason why when I use a commercial seed starting mix, I will dump that bag into a bucket, fill it with water, and let it sit overnight. Mm-hmm. And then drain it the next day by putting it all into like a 5-gallon plant container where there's holes on the bottom and the water can drain out, but the soil mix stays in the bucket. It's wet. I'm going to work with it that day so I can get in there and grab a nice muddy mess and wring it out a bit and throw it in a container and then put the seed down and then sprinkle on some more of that wet soil seed starting mix on top. And that works.
Yeah, and I do it differently. I use kitty litter boxes, not the ones the kitty litter comes in, but the boxes that sit in the house where the cat uses the kitty litter.
The plastic box. The
plastic boxes, yes. And I mix. I never use anything right out of the bag. I always add a little bit more of the rock component, perlite. It would be, or vermiculite in this case of seed starting, because they're small and lightweight particles. That's what you want in a seed starting mix, small and lightweight particles. And then I'll add some water with the hose and use my hands. Maybe I just enjoy that mixing with my hands of the media to get it wet all the way through. Then I'll fill my containers, put the seed on, put the little bit of more moist media, and I always add a little bit of vermiculite on top. Vermiculite is expanded mica. I think of it like an accordion, in that it's got layers like that with spaces between them, and it holds moisture really well because of those layers, how thin they are and how close together they are. A few big dangers in starting seed. One is that your seeds dry out. They dry out, they die, and it's all over. Another is that the temperature gets too extreme one way or another. But the vermiculite helps with the water problem.
You left out another cause of demise. The soil's too wet.
Soil's too wet, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then you have what's called damping off, which is so sad because you get this nice little baby plant growing. It might have cotyledon, might even have 2 true leaves, and then it just falls over.
You come over the next day and the whole, if it's a flat of them, the whole flat of them are just all laid down in the same direction. Yeah, damping off is a fungus that grows at the exact temperatures and humidity and moisture that seedlings germinate, and it eats young seedlings. That's the only thing it eats. If you've got your first true leaves, the stem of the plant is too thick for the damping off fungus to consume it. So it's right when they're first germinated that it consumes them.
I would then start raising red flags around what sort of soil mix did I use when that happened, and I'd probably switch whatever I was doing for a soil mix.
Right. So you want to make sure when you're starting seeds that your containers are immaculately clean, that you've washed them in the sink, and there's no trace of any media left over in them. And if I'm starting drought-tolerant plants, which tend to be more sensitive, I have found, to damping off than than things like tomatoes, I will actually make a 10% bleach solution, and I will put my containers, my washed containers, washed and rinsed, in that for about 10 minutes to disinfect them, and then just let them air dry. And I use fresh media. I reuse my media all the time, but not for starting seeds. For starting seeds, I use clean containers and fresh media.
Knowing you, I bet those containers become clean at the end of the season, not the beginning of the season.
They become rinsed out at the end of the season. When I empty a container of a plant that either I put it in the ground or it didn't survive, I wash the container out right away. But if it's because the plant didn't survive, I want to know why it didn't survive. Did it rot? If it rotted, then I throw the media out. I do not save it. If it just dried out because the battery on my my automatic irrigation system died while I was out of town, then I will reuse that media.
All right. We've planted that seed. I bet it wants some bottom heat as
yes,
well.
And our container needs to have
drainage.
Drainage, right. Yes. So we don't have that buildup of moisture. Yes, bottom heat is ideal. I spent years starting seeds without bottom heat because I didn't have the money to invest in it. Then we got rid of our water bed, and I used the heater for the water bed.
Works, yeah.
Yes, which works very well. If you see them at some kind of estate sale or something, snap them up. The temperature is perfect, and the size is nice, and they're water resistant. So I used that for a long time. That was all I had, and then I was able to buy an official heat mat for starting seeds, and that helps tremendously. You get much more even germination. It's faster germination, and it keeps the media warm. You can start in an unheated greenhouse as long as you've got that bottom heat, as long as the media is warm.
Yep. And when you have that bottom heat, if it's up, and we'll get around probably 70, 75 degrees, that tomato will get off to a good start.
Yes, it will.
I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pot's lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Let's get back to our conversation with Debbie Flower about successful tomato seed starting tips. Just because I don't trust the seeds, I will start the seeds, like 3 seeds in a 3-inch container, thinking, oh, 2 of them aren't going to make it, and I'll have one that I can just leave in the 3-inch container. Well, of course, they all sprout. So that means I have to, at some point, transplant them into their own 3-inch pot. What is the ideal stage for doing that?
First true leaves.
First true leaves. Not second or third, but the first true leaves, because there's less roots to be damaged?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the danger. In thinning, if they're right next to each other, you're going to risk losing both of them if you try to separate them and put them in their own containers. At that point, you would thin, and when you thin, you take a scissor and just cut one off. If you've planted them if I'm going to go your route, I will try to plant them in 3 different corners of the pot if I think I'm going to separate them over time, and then I'll just cut the media apart and use the plant in a column of media and move it into another container.
Giving them room to grow is very important. That's one thing I've learned over the years, is that as that tomato grows, you realize that tomato is going to be growing and growing quickly for about 8 weeks before you can transplant it into the yard when the time has come, when nights are above 50, 55 degrees on a regular basis. Soil temperature is also above 55, 60 degrees at that point as well. Give it room, and don't be shy about using your 1-gallon pots to move those 3-inch plants into a 1-gallon pot.
Yes.
And let them take up a heck of a lot more room and more water.
Yes.
For the short period of time, because you're going to have healthier plants and possibly sooner tomatoes.
Right.
I did that last year, a little test. I had, what variety was it? I think it was Bodacious I tried this on. And I tried them, as I did for years, just growing them in that 3-inch pot until the end of April, and then planting them in the garden while hardening them off the last couple of weeks of April, gradually increasing them to more light and more wind. The ones in the 1-gallon container I had transplanted back in the first week of April, so they had 4 weeks in that 1-gallon container. And I planted that at the end of April. I planted the 3-inch pot at the end of April. I also planted them at the beginning of April, too, to see, well, what'll happen there. And they really prefer being planted at the end of April.
When the soil's warmer.
Yeah, here in USDA Zone 9. And did I get tomatoes sooner? No, but it was close. It was a fun test.
When you put them in the field, did you bury their stems?
Yes, of course. And by then, if they're in a 1-gallon container, they could easily be 1.5 feet or 2 feet tall.
Right.
And instead of burying them, I lay them in a trench.
Yes. You don't want the stems necessarily to go very deep. There isn't as much oxygen in the field soil deep down as there is near the surface. So yes, you create a trench, and tomatoes can be buried up to their just a couple leaves at the top. You can bury almost as much as you want. So
you gently move that head up so it's sticking above the soil.
Yes.
The trench itself would be, 6 inches deep and wide?
Yes.
And whatever the length is of the root ball.
Yes.
Do you point the roots down in a trench?
No.
You can.
The plants will figure it out.
Okay, they're smart.
Yeah. They have what are called tropisms. And that's reaction to a stimulus. Geotropism is reaction to gravity, and roots grow toward gravity.
Oh, okay.
And stems grow away from gravity.
Another benefit of our friend, Mr. Gravity. All right, roots know which way to go.
Yes, they do.
All right. And you don't need to strip the leaves.
You do not.
All right. And again, that's going to be at the time of the year that's appropriate for your area for planting tomatoes. For a lot of people, it's Mother's Day. And that's fine. By the way, you don't have to do all this tomato planting on one day like April 28th. You could do it from here in USDA Zone 9 from the end of April all through May through the first part of June.
Depending on how long a growing season you have. Some tomatoes will produce in 55 days. That's probably the shortest season tomato.
Cherry tomatoes.
Yes. Yeah. So if you have a growing season 55 days, you just want to make sure that you plant at the beginning of that and get your tomatoes at the other end. If like here we have, I don't know how many, 200? We have 180. We have a very long growing season. And so we can plant over time and have different crops maturing over time.
It is not uncommon for me to plant tomato plants in June because somebody said, hey, you want to try this? And me being me goes, well, yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'll find a place.
Yeah, I'll find a place for it. Yeah. And so, yeah, and it's fine. It's because we can get 80 days of growing even planted in mid-June.
Right.
If you're in Minnesota, not so.
Correct.
Yeah. It's or if you're in Truckee, California, at 6,500 feet or whatever it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Much shorter growing season.
Yeah, we call it July up in the Sierra. Yes. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I was visiting a nursery up in Truckee, which is in the Sierra on your way to Tahoe and Reno. And it's at 6,000, 7,000 feet. And there was a nursery there, much to my surprise. I figured, well, I can learn a lot here about planting in a really short season climate. And I said, well, first of all, can you grow tomatoes here? And the owner said, yeah, we have a good month. It's July. Okay, that's it. But it's like the only month where they have never had a freeze.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
And I went to their book rack. You remember books, folks? And the book rack had the Sunset Garden book.
Yes.
It was the Sunset Northeastern Garden.
Oh, my.
Book, the one that they were selling in New England, basically. So like if you garden in Vermont or Maine or up that way, you would have the Northeastern Garden book. Much smaller book than the Western Garden book.
Yes.
But perfect if you live in Truckee.
Yes. For
the plants that would do well there.
Yes. And there are places that can't grow tomatoes, like the Pacific Coast, properties that butt up to the Pacific Coast because the nights never get that warm.
Well, not only do they not get that warm, but they also have a lot of humidity and maybe mildew to contend with, which tomatoes don't like. And I don't know about, so somebody from San Francisco is going to tell us about their tomato patch.
Yes, and that's where you get into season extenders, covering the plant, trapping heat, things like that.
I'll tell you exactly where there is such a garden. It's the Call Garden. The Call Garden.
Never heard of it.
You should drive up there and see it. The Call Garden is north of San Francisco. It would be in Sonoma County, and it's part of Fort Ross.
I've been there.
Okay, well, behind Fort Ross is a house, and it belonged to the Call family. They actually bought Fort Ross from the Russians back in the late 1800s. And raised cattle there, and they also had an apple orchard there. But they also had a garden. His daughter wanted a garden. So, clever guy Mr. Call was, he planted a row of eucalyptus against the prevailing wind that came in right off the ocean. They were right on the coast.
Yes.
But there was this 3-4 layer of eucalyptus trees that protected this small patch of land. And they had a wide variety of vegetables and flowers that they could grow there in that environment.
And good exposure to southern sun, I would think, would be important.
Yeah. There's plenty of sun on sunny
there
days.
is.
On sunny days.
At the Pacific Coast, that's not always often.
Yeah, it's like maybe 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day. But still, right variety, right plant, right place.
Right. And there are some tomatoes now that produce what's called parthenocarpically, meaning that they do not have to be pollinated to make fruit, kind of like a seedless orange. And that can be beneficial if you never get those sunny days when the bees are traveling.
Right. All right. So just enjoy your tomatoes. By the way, we should answer this question too. Do you need to prune that tomato plant?
You don't have to. I was doing some reading about that. When I gardened in New Jersey and I got my bachelor's degree in horticulture in New Jersey, we were told to prune just so we had two main stems. Tomatoes produce what are called suckers, which think of them as branches that arise between the main stem and the leaf. And this method of pruning in New Jersey took off every sucker except the first one. And we staked them, tied them to a stake, and got tomatoes early and enough. But here in California, where I live now, I wouldn't get tomatoes. I would get fried tomatoes. They would be exposed to way too much sun, and they would dry out and burn. And so there can be a happy medium. Lately, I have not been pruning my tomatoes because I want protection from the very strong sun, protection of the fruit from the very strong sun. And the research shows that you don't necessarily get any more tomatoes with pruning, but you can open them up so that they're easier to see, easier to handle, that kind of thing.
There are two popular tomato brush fires on the internet about pruning. One is take off the early flowers so you get more fruit later on. And the other is prune out the armpit hairs, the growths that happen, the suckers that grow in the crotches of the stems in order to direct the growth to the existing foliage and fruit that's on there. And both of those are premises based on research that didn't have much to do with the backyard gardener. It usually had to do with greenhouse production on a short season basis. And so basically, you don't have to prune if you don't want to.
No.
And Cornell University even bluntly said, when you prune off tomato flowers, you get fewer tomatoes,
yes.
period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yes. If you leave the suckers, they grow to be their own branches that have flowers and fruit on them themselves.
Mm-hmm. They're tasty, too.
Yeah, they work.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Did we cover it? Did we get the tomatoes planted? Did we get them grown?
I think we did. Let's eat.
All right. Let's go kill some tomato worms. Debbie, thanks for your help.
My pleasure, Fred.
You want to start the backyard fruit and nut orchard of your dreams, but maybe you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you're currently growing fruit and nut trees and you've got a million questions, such as what are the tastiest fruits to grow? Where can I go to buy some of these delectable fruit and nut trees you've been reading about? And then how do you care for all of these trees, including planting, pruning, and harvesting? I've got one online stop in mind for you where all these questions you might have will get answered. It's DaveWilson.com. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest wholesaler of fruit and nut trees for the backyard garden. They have planting tips, taste test results, and links to nurseries in your area that carry Dave Wilson fruit trees. Click on the Home Garden tab at DaveWilson.com for all of these links, including a link to their years of informative videos about growing fruit and nut trees that they've posted on the Dave Wilson Nursery YouTube channel. Start the backyard orchard of your dreams at DaveWilson.com.
Hi, Fred. This is Ken from Palo Alto, and this last year I started growing my tomato plants from seed. Starting about January, I did various varieties, including Better Boy, Early Girl, Cherokee Purple, etc. And all of the plants seemed to be a lot skinnier and less hardy in March when the garden center varieties came out. The plants also didn't seem to do as well in general. Is there any hints of what I could do better next year to grow hardier seedlings? Thanks again for all your advice, and I value your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, from Palo Alto in the San Francisco Bay Area. He contacted us via SpeakPipe. If you'd like to give us a question, I hope you could use speakpipe.com. It's very easy. You go to speakpipe.com/gardenbasics and press the button, and away you go. And we would love to hear your voice here on the Garden Basics podcast. Debbie Flower is here, our favorite retired college horticultural professor. It sounds like Ken may need, I'm thinking, more light.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to Ken for starting his tomatoes from seed and getting a plant. You know, that's a hurdle that not everyone gets over.
Yeah, but it's a good hurdle to get over just because there is just so many more varieties available via seed.
Yes. And January was about the right time to start tomatoes from seed in Palo Alto, so good timing. I think you're right. I think light is one of the factors that he may need to increase. And the other one that came to mind for me was wind. Plants, he said they're thin. Plants will be thin unless they're challenged by movement. The experiment was done by shaking a greenhouse table for 10 minutes a day. I'm not into shaking the table, so I use a fan, and that shakes the stem of the plant and makes it thicker. It'll be a shorter, stouter plant. 10 minutes a day is a good amount, and so I use an oscillating fan that goes back and forth and makes those stems move. If you've ever had a cast, have you? I have not had a cast on a limb, an arm or leg, something like that. You have to wear, if you break a bone, you know.
Knock on wood, no.
Yeah, same here. People who have broken a bone of an arm and a leg have to wear a cast that immobilizes that part of the limb for, I think it's about 6 weeks. I'm sure it varies, and when they take the cast off, that limb is very weak. It's thin and weak. It has no muscle on it because it hasn't been used. That's what I like in the tomato that has been grown without wind is the one that's been in the cast. The one that's grown with wind is the one that has been able to exercise all those 6 weeks and create muscle. In a plant, it's called reaction wood.
Reaction wood.
Yes.
Yeah. Ken didn't give us very many details about how or where he's growing these seedlings. And I have a funny feeling if it was just in a sunny window, they would be rather bent.
Yes. Yes, he talked about thin, but he didn't mention bent, but they would bend toward the light.
Right.
He may have turned them daily and gotten them to grow straight or straighter, but that won't thicken them up.
Right. And a fan is a great idea, and maybe one of those indoor type greenhouses that's basically a plant rack with a set of fluorescent lights or LED lights above it that you can adjust the height. And a lot of people don't put those lights close enough to the seedlings. It has to be just a couple of inches above.
Yes, and they need to be, in the case of fluorescents, they need to be relatively new, not the ones you take out of your office because you're putting new ones in the office or whatever. They need to be relatively new. Fluorescent light bulbs decline in quality over time.
Like us.
No, we're getting better with age. So, yeah, they need to be very close. It needs to be a very strong amount of light. In a class with students, I had them use light meters and measure amounts of light close to windows, let's say, and then a foot away. And the amount was incredibly different. Much less light a foot away from the window, close to a fluorescent bulb and a foot away. The amount of light declines very quickly when you get away from those light sources. So the light over a tomato, LED or fluorescent, would be ideal, because they're cool sources of light and you won't burn the leaves when you have them so close to the plant. Should be max 2 inches over the plant. Right.
And you would want it on a rack where you can easily adjust the height of the lights to allow for the plants to grow.
Right. And those are made, like you said, sort of like indoor greenhouses. One setup I had was in the guest room of a house, and I hung eye bolts in the ceiling and chains from the eye bolts and a fluorescent fixture on the chains. And so I could raise and lower the two ends of the fluorescent bulb and move the plants around so the taller ones were on one side and the shorter ones on the other side, and keep the light approximately 2 inches away from those plants.
And in my experience with fluorescent lights, the longer ones are better than the shorter ones. You can buy fluorescent bulbs as small as like a foot long, but I always opted for the 3 foot long in a dual fixture where you could mix a shop light with a cool light bulb that had sort of a blue hue to it.
Right. Fluorescents do come in, and LEDs for sure do come in different colors. You don't have to spend the money for a full spectrum bulb to grow seedlings. If you want to bring something to flower and fruit, then yes, you do. But just to grow seedlings, to start your tomatoes for your vegetable garden, you don't need a full spectrum light bulb, but you do need the blue spectrum and the pink spectrum. The one you use in the bathroom will be the pink one because it makes you look lovely. And
really?
Yes,
I did not know that.
It makes your flesh look beautiful. And then there will be the cool ones, which are the more office-y type bulbs. But they should tell you whether they're in the blue spectrum, which is cool, or the warm spectrum, which is the reds. And you want one of each. So yes, you want a fixture that will hold 2 bulbs.
And for those of you born in the 21st century, yes, LED lights are the way to go.
They are. If you've got the fixture and the money, they've gotten a lot cheaper, I have to say.
Yes, they have. And they're very adjustable. Some are on like goosenecks where you can just sort of bend it to get it closer to the plant.
If you're doing a bunch of plants, and he mentioned 1, 2, 3 at least cultivars, that one gooseneck may not be enough.
Right. As far as fertilization of these seedlings, would that help at all?
Hard to tell. He didn't tell us anything about the color of the plants. I would use color of the leaves and the stems as an indication of deficiency. If they're a good green color, then whatever he was doing was probably sufficient. But if they weren't, if they were showing yellow, then that would indicate a lack of nitrogen. But a a week fertilization done on a regular basis is the best thing for the plants.
Ken, thanks so much for your question. Debbie Flower, thanks for your help on this.
Always a pleasure, Fred.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast has a lot of information posted at each episode in the show notes. Maybe you'd rather read it than listen to it. That's not a problem. We have a complete transcript posted, and you can find that link in the show notes or on our new homepage, gardenbasics.net. That's where you can find that link, as well as all the previous episodes of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. There you can leave a message or link up with our social media pages, including our YouTube video page. And at gardenbasics.net, click on the tab at the top of the page to read the Garden Basics Beyond Basics newsletter. Plus, in the show notes, there are links to any products or books mentioned during the show and other helpful links for even more information. Want to leave us a question? Again, check the links at gardenbasics.net. And when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe, where you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or go to them directly, speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. Spoiler alert, it's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net to get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because, as I am fond of saying, all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.